So Kelhofer is the IFC Senior Country Manager for Ghana and Liberia. Our interview tonight is focused on Ghana. Where have they come from? Where are they? And where do they want us to get to as an economy in relation to their support for private sector and also giving the needed impetus for our development? Carl, thanks for joining us.
Delighted to be here, Bernard.
How long have you been in Ghana?
This time, 4 years.
Okay.
But
prior to this?
First came here in 1998.
Oh, wow.
And then I lived here 2006, 2010, and then we went to Asia for a bit, and then we came back 4 years ago.
How different is IFC from, say, the World Bank and the IMF?
Good question. It goes back to our origins, okay? And in 1944, towards the end of World War II, the international stakeholders got together and realized they needed institutions to help rebuild Europe and help ensure economic stability, to help avoid future conflict. About 10 years into that, though, they realized that actually for economic development, a key driver was private sector development, particularly for jobs and jobs creation. So that's why in 1956 they created the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, to finance the private sector in emerging markets and developing countries around the world.
Why developing markets and emerging markets in particular? Is it because the finance they need is different from what, say, advanced economy, private sector would need?
That was part of the transition, because the World Bank was originally to International Bank for Reconstruction and Redevelopment, to help rebuild Europe. But in the 50s, it kind of moved on to help finance and help developing countries develop.
So you are cousins to IMF and World Bank. So do you run the same cycle with them? So for example, as we speak, we are in the nether regions of an IMF program, extended by 3 months. So do you sort of tie your work to what IMF does and the World Bank, or it's different?
I mean, the IMF, they do their own thing, okay? Obviously, with the World Bank and the World Bank Group, we work together, and because we're one World Bank Group, we coordinate with the IMF, and we coordinate closely, but obviously for information channels, they have their own rubric, we have our own rubric, but clearly we prioritize some of the key sectors together.
So, again, using a specific example, we've received $3 billion from the IMF in various chunks, right? The World Bank will give us sometimes $1 billion or more for development projects, which is what is called development concessionary finance. Within that period, how much would you give us, and what type of money would it be?
That's a great question. Unlike the IMF and the World Bank that are financing governments or the Ghanaian government to be paid by the government of Ghana and the taxpayers of Ghana, IFC, we finance the private sector, both local corporates and international investors. So we're much more opportunistic. And in some countries, in the midst of an IMF program or World Bank program, maybe the enabling environment isn't that great. Okay, whereas in Ghana in the last few years, it's been a bit different in that, thanks to some of these reforms and the improved stability or the trending towards macro stability, there's been tremendous opportunities on the private sector. So we IFC, we've seen investors, international and local, wanting to expand or wanting to grow, and so we've been financing a fair amount. But remember, this is important. We are repaid by the investors themselves, not the government of Ghana, not the taxpayers of Ghana, but the businesses here in Ghana.
So if I get this right, your money that you give private sector doesn't go to government debt?
No.
You don't lend to sovereigns?
Absolutely.
You lend to private entities?
Correct. Correct. And this is why governments are keen on collaborating, because we are trying to help finance things, including essential infrastructure, things like the Tema port. That was done through the private sector, not on the balance sheet of the government.
Because when IMF gives money, it goes sometimes with budget support. World Bank, a whole mix of things, some specific projects, some to government. So you would lend at commercial rate to a viable private sector vehicle in a sector that may not be prioritized by your two cousins.
But it's got to make economic sense. And our cousins are helping to create sectors and help make them viable. For instance, a priority of the World Bank and the IMF in the last few years is to bring increased stability to the banking sector. As a result, we IFC, we can step in and provide financing for SocGen to lend more to SMEs and to women-owned enterprises, or Bank of Africa to lend more to SMEs.
But for the uninitiated, development finance, people may perceive that it should be concessionary. Do you do market rates? I just want you to explain the difference, right? Because if World Bank gives us money, it's obviously we're not paying at the same rate as, say, ABSA would give us the money. Does IFC's rate lie in between World Bank and ABSA, or is the same as ABSA or SG or whichever
What
bank?
we like to see ourselves doing is doing something that the traditional commercial sector is not quite yet comfortable with. Okay, so maybe the private banks are comfortable giving a local corporate a 5-year loan. Maybe we're comfortable giving them an 8 or 9 or 10-year loan. Okay, so we don't want to compete directly. We want to be doing things that are kind of pushing the envelope of what's being done. Are local banks, international banks comfortable lending to the energy sector here in Ghana? Whereas we've been comfortable lending to LMI Holdings to help finance over 100 megawatts of solar.
So a better example of your competitor, or I won't even use the word competitor, somebody in your same bracket would be, say, Badea or AFDB. Are they sort of in the same, maybe Afrexim?
Exactly.
Okay.
AFDB, FMO, Parco, DEG. In fact, there's a whole community of DFIs. And in fact, we try to work together because sometimes we see projects where it makes more sense for all of us to kind of be involved to help move it forward. Do
you do cross-national investments? So for example, there's a ECOWAS highway project. I'm not saying have you funded that, but generally, because you're head of Ghana Liberia, right? So I suspect you do Ghana-specific projects. But there are some projects that are needed that would unlock, so for example, transportation across the sub-region, or say the Inga Dam, right? Things that happen that require more than one country. Does the IFC think about finance that way, or is more country-specific?
I'll give you 3 examples. One is we financed a large scale of our portfolio are funds, like private equity funds, venture capital funds, digital funds. They're regional or Pan-African. And so we might have some funds here in Ghana, like 4DX, but they operate in Kenya, they operate in Egypt, but they just happen to be based here in Ghana. 2, you have a company, say, like B5 Steel,
all right,
okay, based here in Ghana, and we've financed them. However, the bulk of what we're financing is actually financing steel for Mali, for Niger, for around the region. So the region is benefiting by this actual project here in Ghana. But you're right, there are some projects that span actual boundaries. In fact, when I was managing Bangladesh, we financed the cement plant. And the actual cement itself was mined on the other side of the border. And it came across a conveyor to the actual cement plant in Bangladesh. And so we can do cross-border.
But I need to point out there's a difference between you and people like AFDB and Exim, because they do lend to sovereigns.
Yeah.
Because I know a big debate within the finance conversation has been how to treat the debt Ghana had with an organization like the Afrexim, or that should be part of the debt restructuring. So does that mean that even during the time that Ghana was kicked out of the international market, you were still lending to projects in Ghana? I think 2022 into parts of 23, when the country was having challenges as a sovereign borrower, you were still running projects, or did you have to pause because your cousins were thinking of what to do? How did that work?
It was actually a fascinating time because despite what was taking place at the sovereign, the business community saw this as more of a fiscal crisis. Remember, the cocoa sector was still doing, the oil sector and remittances were still coming. So the business sector was still seeing opportunities to do more. And so in fact, over the last 3 years, which includes part of this crisis, we IFC have done more business, over $1 billion worth of business than the previous 7 years combined. Okay, so the business community was seeing opportunities, and in some ways the entire country itself was saying maybe the private sector needs to step up and play a role and build some of these things and create the jobs, since the government can't under the current situation.
Do you have priority sectors ab initio, or is this country specific? Because you did say you are also opportunistic.
Good question. Both. Obviously, we have some global priorities. Obviously, agriculture, food security, and food security is not just food security, but economic security. So we have a global World Bank Group initiative, AgriConnect, to help improve agriculture, including small stakeholders, fintech, large-scale commercial. But at the same time, we like to pitch in and help in with some country-specific priorities. context matters, for lack of a better word. So, and I'll get to this maybe later, but there, for instance, here in Ghana, there's a unique time in capital markets. A unique time for capital markets to develop, to take advantage of the several $1 billion in the pension funds that can now be deployed to help grow business here in Ghana. That's unique to Ghana, and we look forward to supporting that.
A couple of concerns have to do with countries like Ghana because of the FX risk. If even our private companies borrow in foreign currency, it's very difficult. So it makes more sense for them to take international loans in local currency so that FX risk is reduced. So for example, in 2021, the cedi to the dollar was probably like 4, right? By end 2022, it was over 10, right? So if you give me a facility of $1 million, whatever I'm producing, I would be completely screwed, right? So how does the IFC think about this? Do you lend in local currency? And if you do both, how do you, I mean, the macroeconomy will make it a very difficult value proposition for a business which is not very strong to benefit from your funding.
No, that's a great question, and countries face this around the world, okay? And businesses face this around the world. I want to have my assets and liabilities match. There's several ways to mitigate that. One is we're increasingly working with banks because they have the local currency liquidity to help leverage their liquidity to achieve our goals, including our impact, including our lending. And so with Bank of Africa and Access Bank, those were not actual financings, okay? But these were guarantees.
All right.
Okay, and so through SocGen, for the support for the cocoa sector, again, that was a guarantee. So the cocoa supply chain is getting local currency from Societe Generale. It's just guaranteed, insured by IFC. And so we're helping to make that happen. That's one way. Two is there are still industries that have large degrees of international earnings, whether it's tourism, whether it's export-oriented industries, both regional and international. Three is, and again, this is where this whole capital market story gets interesting, is that there's increasing opportunities with the macro stability for IFC to help better mobilize local currency, including IFC potentially even raising our own local currency on the market. But what's really important in all of this, Bernard, is not just local currency and foreign currency, but ensuring convertibility. Problem from businesses in a lot of markets around the world. They might be able to make the money, but can they convert it so they can do business offshore or repo their creditors offshore? And I think this is where Ghana's done a pretty good job of, despite some of these fluctuations, the cedi's always largely been convertible.
So a couple of points. Am I to understand that because your source of funds are not domestic, it will be difficult to lend in local currency? Because usually where you get your money from and what the person who gave you the money expects will determine how you can on-lend it. Is that because you have understood the FX risk will exclude a lot of local companies that do not have large external markets?
No, I mean, we are a bank, and so we do have a treasury department that has a full range of tools and instruments to actually enable us to lend. So whether we're working with banks for them to on-lend, whether we're leveraging offshore or onshore swaps, and through a swap arrangement, mobilizing local currency finance for a local corporate, or IRC potentially issuing our own paper, as we do in some markets, and then on-lending that. And so we are open for business in local currency. It's just a matter of just, the treasury kicking in and the
are you actively deepening that?
I think in this era of macro stability and this era of pension funds having large scale assets, I think there's a very real opportunity to do more in local currency.
The rate you charge, so maybe I'm doing a housing project, right? In a place that's supposed to provide housing for medium or middle class Ghanaians, right? Obviously, the rate that I get that financing from the IFC and your partners will go a long way to determine my ability to pay back and whether I can expand. So the question I'm asking is, do you try to be competitive in the rates you charge to these private sector companies in order for the projects to succeed? Or is it just purely profit maximizing, the widest price you can get?
Well, in the long, obviously it needs to be profit. I'm saying businesses profit maximizing. We're trying to get them to push the needle and to do more.
Yeah.
Obviously, if we see a country that's highly developmental,
Yeah.
that's creating a lot of jobs, or demonstrating, maybe it's a small project, maybe it's a pilot project,
Yeah.
maybe it doesn't fully, if we bring it up to scale,
Yeah.
we'll step up and try to support that for the development impact. I mean, we IFC, we look for the lens. One is
Yeah.
it needs to be profitable over the medium term because we're
Yeah.
self-financing, but two, development impact really matters. Okay, I'll give you an example. We're supporting here in Ghana, DTRT, Do the Right Thing.
Yeah.
Which is
Textiles.
Exactly.
Textiles.
Okay, and which is the most modern international textile operation in West Africa.
Yes.
Okay, on a standalone basis, it can be challenging. Okay, but it's created over 8,000 jobs.
Yeah.
Primarily for women. It's located right here in Tudu
Yeah.
and out here in Tema. It's come a long way over the last 10, 15 years. It's been challenging from a business perspective. Obviously, we've had to, for a $4 million loan or an $8 million loan, does that cover all of our costs? Probably not. Okay. But it's something that we want to support because we believe in the medium term, we're going to see more such businesses come here in Ghana and create more and better jobs and more business opportunities. Absolutely. And today we're delighted that DTRT has now exceeded the productivity of, say, companies in Bangladesh to show that Ghana can compete with businesses around the world. So from a pure standalone business perspective, did that investment make sense to do just on its own? Maybe not. But to help grow and develop a sector, absolutely.
I like the DTRT example because if you look at competitiveness across developing emerging markets, Vietnam, where you've lived, and Bangladesh would have many more DTRTs doing much, much more. And part of the reason, of course, is capabilities that they've learned over time, but part of it's also finance, cost of finance. So I'm pushing on the finance question because you are development finance. And the only way DTRT can expand to Tamale, to Togo, and to Sierra Leone and Liberia is if they make money. And there's no way going to make money if the cost of funds is too high. So if you want to spread DTRT to become a sub-regional hub, you may want to make a longer term case for finance to say, look, these guys should not be treated like a normal finance case. Development finance should also be long-termist, and it should also be cheaper, because what DTRT unlocks, with now AGOA expanded by another 3 years, is potentially economic transformative. So my point is, you need to admit the finance constraint on why DTRT cannot compete with Bangladesh, and also have a longer term horizon if you are to show impact.
Look, I'm proud to say that I think we've stepped in and provided long-term finance to DTRT when nobody else was interested in providing it long-term finance. Okay, because this is a tricky business because you get orders annually. Okay, so who's going to give a 5 or 8 or 10 year loan for somebody that can only say, hey, I only have orders for 6 months or 9 months? Okay, that's where I'm proud that we actually stepped in and precisely filled this void, as you say. It's because it's not just pricing; it's access and getting the term structure that they need to compete, and for parallel operations. But I think we have actually addressed precisely as you speak for their need. Now, are they going to grow, expand to Sierra Leone? Maybe, maybe not. Why not just go from 7,000 jobs to 50,000 jobs here in Accra?
Well, because economic transformation also require some sort of scale. And the reason a lot of our countries remain the way they are is because they are too small. And if we look at what our cousins in Asia are doing, clearly scale is a big issue. But we'll take a break. This is the point of view. We're speaking to Kelhofer, who's the senior country manager for IFC, who are the world's largest development finance institute. Over 80 countries. They've spent many, many years in Ghana, and we're reflecting on the history of the organization and the potential for them to unlock finance for our development. When we come back, we'll talk about some of the key areas of focus of this institution and also look into the crystal ball as to where they see the country in the next few years. Stay with us.